Fantastic guest. Really excited to have Alex Stokes on. How are you, Alex?
Very good. Nice to be here. Thank you, Tony.
Or should I say Alexandra?
Both. Yep, that's what my mum calls me. That's what's on the book.
All right, I'll stick with Alex. Look, before we get rolling into that, don't forget if you want to join our remote AF community, all you need to do is go to remoteaf.co, click the community button, join us. Lots of people talking about the stuff that we'll be talking about today and many things to do with remote. We'd be really happy to have you. If you want to grab a copy of our dynamically adaptive organisation, say that 3 times fast early in the morning, you can get that white paper in the show notes below. And everything we talk about with Alex today will be in the show notes as well. Without further ado, Alex, how about you introduce yourself so that those that don't know you do?
Okay, Tony. So, yeah, my name's Alex Stokes, or Alexandra Stokes, and I run a small consultancy called Reboot Co. with my co-founder Tony Fivefoot, and we've been applying agile, lean, system thinking, design thinking to help teams and organisations deliver value better since the late 90s, actually. And my learning journey with all that stuff started back in the late 90s when I was a software engineer, and through joining the Agile movement then and working with many different companies, both as a consultant, helping companies and a coach, but also from the inside companies. So I have had head of engineering roles, head of digital roles. And so through that, working in really big companies, medium companies, and small companies, I've come to become a specialist in the area of transformation. And I've just written a book called Empowered Agile Transformation Beyond the Framework. Holding up a copy here. And I guess that's why we're talking today, Tony.
Well, it is, but I've meant to have you on the show because obviously we've known each other some time, and our career paths follow very similar trajectories, and I came to Agile much in the same way as yourself. And of course, I know. Shout out to Tony Fivefoot. I've known Tony a very long time. He was on the original Agile Advanced Masterclass with Alistair Coburn that we were on.
Yeah.
So that was a long time ago. But anyway,
Yes.
we'll
It
talk
is a
more about
long time ago.
yeah, we'll talk
We're
more
entering.
about him today. All right. So,
Yeah. But we're entering, I guess, several decades. We're entering 3 decades of knowledge of this stuff. And yeah, I love working with Tony because he's got that kind of deep and broad knowledge as well. And I guess there's a few of us in the Agile community that would recognize each other for having that deep and long tenure. Um, and then there's like a whole new wave of Agilists out there as well, which is also interesting and a different dynamic, and something we probably didn't expect back in the early days of agility.
I don't think we knew what was coming or what was going to happen. We were just excited by what we were doing. I like to say I'm in my 3rd decade. That's the easy way to put it now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that means old. For me, anyway.
Same.
Now, so you have written a book about transformations, and I think it's a really good thing that you have done so, because there's not a lot of books on transformation. But talk to me about why you wrote this book.
So, yeah, several reasons. One was it was just a bucket list thing. I always wanted to write a book. Like I write a lot of content anyway. Like an avid blogger, and we had a podcast, and that's one of the things I enjoy doing. So that was it. I had an itch to scratch, but also mainly I felt like it was time to just download my experience, because I guess what we're all seeing in this community, and it's mentioned very top line in the book, is that there's a lot of transformation failure out there. Like the statistic is apparently around 70% of transformations fail. And, I wondered why that was, because like yourself, involved in transformations in the early days, we probably saw so much, good uplift, good increase of value delivery. People enjoyed it. It felt empowering. And it struck me as like, why all this failure? We should be getting better at this, not worse at this. So the software, project failure rate back in the 90s, I don't know if you remember, Tony, but I think we used to quote the statistic 80% of
80%.
projects fail in time, scope, or expectations being met, or quality. And now having a 70% statistic for transformation failure means that we've all this industry, all these people, all these careers, all these frameworks, and all this time to just get that small gain in success rate seemed like not enough. So I really want to dig into why that was, and why those big scaling frameworks that we've started sort of using around about 2000, early 2010s, 11, 12, 14, maybe, those big frameworks started appearing and people started using these as their kind of tool set. Why hasn't that, got the outcome that maybe we would desire it would get? Or why those organizations, agile in name, maybe, and all of the labels say it. But when we go and work with those teams, we see that they're very, very much stuck. They can't deliver value. They feel oppressive leadership behaviors happening to them. They're getting forced back into almost a waterfall type model. And then we're in dependency hell. So why has this happened? What happened to those good original bones of agile? Can we wrest this term back from the corruption that it has become? And there's kind of like two warring factions of agile my way or agile this way. So I wanted to get what I thought were really positive patterns into a book, and really I want to target the C-suite, the execs who have to make decisions about whether we're going to engage in transformation or not, and give them almost like, I don't want to like overstate how impactful it might be, but give them a bit of a Bible or a bit of a guidebook of, hey, here are a bunch of patterns that you can follow for your organization, and have them feel confident to engage in this without having to rely on those large frameworks and those large framework implementations that are very kind of like one size fits all, and without having to rely on like a very big, expensive consultancy approach. Because the pattern I'm seeing in Melbourne and in our cities in Australia with those approaches is people are engaging these big consultancies. They're rolling out their frameworks. They're burning up their money very, very quickly. So the organisation says, can't have you here anymore to help.
Yeah.
And they're really leaving them in a position where they haven't got the competencies that they need inside the company yet. And they don't really know what to do. They've got all of these clashes of governance approaches and many different ways of working. And they're just left in a position where we can't afford to pay for you anymore. Now we have to work it out for ourselves. But where do we turn to do that? Yeah.
And that has people questioning the value, or organisations then questioning the value of the transformation, or worse still, questioning the value of agile and the people that actually purvey agile, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a very sad thing. And what I like about the book is you're very positive in the book. You've taken a positive bent on it. It's very easy in this situation. And like, we had our own separate podcast before we got on here because we were talking through all of this stuff.
Yes.
Right. So it was funny, but it's very easy to focus on the negatives rather than positives in these kind of situations. But so what I like is that you've actually set it out in, this is how you can actually do this. Talk to me about thoughts around why you went around that way.
Well, because I feel like there is so much good stuff, and we may be missing all the good stuff because we're getting caught up in the complex stuff. And like if you're an exec and I said to you, hey, don't spend several $100,000 trying to do this and get in an army of coaches to help you, why not just get in a few really good people and do it yourself and do it simply, save money and get a better result? As an exec, wouldn't you say, for sure, we should try that way? So I think that there is a lot of positive stuff still out there, and a lot of great people that have very broad and deep experience that organizations can be using. Like, why not? You're going to do a big transformation. Why not get in a Tony Fivefoot, a Chris Chan, a Renee, a Tony Ponton? Like, instead of going for a decision that might seem good to a board or an exec team, but it won't have the longevity. And once organizations make those big, expensive decisions, they feel like they have to back those decisions no matter what. And we all know what that looks like, which is a bit of an emperor's new clothes approach to, like, we have to call it this framework because that's sort of what we paid for. But yeah, why that approach is, I think, one of the problems that is key, a theme in the book, and I think key theme in our industry, if you can call it that, is that our executive team don't have experiential learning of these ways of working,
Yeah.
because we have this kind of 10 to 20 year time frame where the executives running organizations today in the main have not even worked on an agile team before. And you'd be surprised how many agile coaches sometimes haven't worked on an agile team before, like haven't done a role inside an agile team, felt that good feeling of being able to deliver value, felt that good autonomy, felt that real kind of flow and that speed. And if our executives haven't had that experience, then they cannot really understand what the team's going through. They're kind of many layers of abstraction away from it. And so they can't really support what has to happen. And so what has happened is, these scaling frameworks have come in and said, um, we don't have to touch the exec, just leave them alone.
Yeah.
Let us put in our big old frameworks. And that was kind of, that felt like, okay, a good enough compromise back in, you know, 2010s to 2014. That's a good compromise because it allows the teams to be agile. But we've never addressed that executive layer. There's a layer of learning and competency missing from that executive layer. And so what happens is they just default to the behaviors that they've learned over many years, which is, hang on a minute, that team's spending a lot of money. I can't see the value delivery. And they start to try and push them back into that old model of give me a date, give me certainty, give me scope. And that really crushes the agile team. So I guess, you and I, Tony, would believe in the beautiful gold that is inside an agile team. That is the engine of value delivery for an organization. And so we must do so much to protect that. We must be able to give them the environment and the tools and everything they need to succeed. And that includes the leadership and management support. And, you know, a lot of the time we're not doing that. We're sort of compromising that great team concept, and we're diluting it by putting many layers of management. Like Australians love their hierarchies, man.
I don't think
Um,
it's just Australia from traversing the organisational constructs of the world.
yeah,
It flows straight through it. So you're
yeah.
hitting the mark with that perfectly.
And there's this belief, right, that if we have all these, great autonomous self-organizing teams, oh well, we can't leave them without leadership. We can't leave them without, leadership in their craft, leadership in their delivery, leadership in the product ideas. And before long, you've got these kind of extra layers of management around the team that actually, if you work in a team, you realize you don't need that in order to deliver value. So I mean, I think we're a long way off still, but I feel like the future will be organizations that I don't want to say flatten, because it's not just about being flat, but it's about, protecting that kind of, we create these cell-like structures, and
Yes.
a cell has everything it needs to generate energy, get its inputs and outputs. We shouldn't compromise that by corrupting it with all of this other nonsense that, frankly, is, Lean would call it over processing waste,
Yes.
and we don't need it. It's not adding value.
I think that stems from, and as we talked off air, my opinion on this is that the word transformation, and as you said, we want to re-own transformation, right? Because we've seen a lot of these things that transformation is very interesting, because when you talk about it, it's a very polarizing word.
Mm,
You've either got people who've seen transformation done well,
yeah,
you've seen people who have seen transformation done badly,
yeah,
or people who are in the middle of transformation hell. And
yes,
there's those three pieces to the puzzle. And normally what I see is that a lot of transformation is actually what I call transitional, not transformational. So they transition the flow of work because that's easy, albeit they may not do that as well as they should in terms of the teaming that we just talked
mm,
about. But as you said, they're not addressing the other components to it. And we talked about that. It's this 3-speed economy is the way I see it. You transition your flow of work, which is great. But if you don't transition the way you govern the system of work and the way you fund the system of work, and within governing that means leading, as you were talking about, then we have a problem, Alex.
yeah.
And I think, one of the things that you talk about in the book is making sure that we touch all of those layers, which is what I like about that as well. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I mean, even that question of governance, and I mean, funding is a huge one because we're very locked into funding models.
Yeah.
And in the book, I kind of say, yes, that absolutely needs to change, but it's often not the first place you go to. Like, I put my hands up and say, I've had many goes at trying to fix that up front, and I've sat round with CFOs and said, like, this is what Agile is, this is how it works, we'll take you to other organizations to see how they've solved this. And they've nodded away and understood. They've understood about, the need to be more adaptive, the reason we can't be slow to change, the reason why we can't know everything up front, but we need to invest money in experimentation to try. And they nod away, they nod away, they nod away. And they turn to someone else in their team and say, yeah, but we can't change
Yep.
how we do our reporting. So it is a hard one to crack. The patterns in the book I talk about are visiting other places, talking to peer, peer-to-peer in every exec role type, I think, is very, very important. We have one of our favorite C-suite guys who's actually written a section of the book which talks about that, because it's very hard for an exec level person to admit they don't know something. Their whole status and their whole reason that they're still in their position in the organization is they've got expert knowledge and they can apply great decision making. So it's hard for those people to get into a learning space and be vulnerable. Much easier to do it peer-to-peer. And another thing I think about the funding stuff is, or where I've seen it cracked most effectively, is when I worked in a large organization, 40,000 employees, and the person who was our digital leader at the time, who was creating this new digital team, I was head of digital engineering at the time, he was an ex certified practicing accountant, and he kept up his accountancy accreditations, and so he could speak the language of the finance team. He knew what people were looking for. So I think it's on all of us to learn about what are these finance and governance people actually needing, because we're almost a bit too scared to engage in talking with leaders, I think. And we actually have to engage in those conversations more heavily. I think as Agile coaches, what we do is what we're comfortable doing. Okay, you need me to take several squads, get them working effectively, great. You need me to visualize how you're making prioritizations, you need OKRs. We'll go to those things that are comfortable. What's not natural and comfortable for a lot of really great Agilists yet is really conversing at that level. And that's another reason, back to your original question today, which is why I wrote the book, is I want to be able to talk to those people and offer them alternative approaches that are not expensive and more likely to succeed, not fail. Yeah. So, and then I think that there's a whole thing around even your premise of governance and funding, Tony, which is,
Great.
what are the organizations of the future? They're going to want to centralize those things. Like, why do we want to centralize those things? We want to centralize those things because we feel that gives us control over what's going on. Like, you give an autonomous team, they're just going to spend money really effectively, go off and do things. How do we know what they're doing? It's that feeling of control being lost that makes people try and centralize things, put them through a central sausage machine, make all the decisions centrally. And if you're trying to preserve that centralized heavy control model, you're not going to get the most out of your Agile team. I mean, do it if you want to, but you're just not going to get effective value delivery out of that team.
You're actually truncating your ability to actually leverage all the good things that you put together. I have myself and Phil Budzinski, obviously we do a lot of the governance space, who you know well.
Yes.
And we have a saying, it's literally, don't put governance in your agility, put agility in your governance.
Oh, nice.
And
there's a bumper sticker, Tony.
Yay! Well, that's just the title of a book coming soon.
Oh, very good.
We're talking about yours. But the reality of that is that's what we see. And you and I are talking about. I think it does stem back to leadership though as well. In terms of that, is that leadership. When you introduce agile or agility to organizations, by rote it starts to disseminate control, because that's what it's meant to do, right? And then when you've got leaders who've worked in a very traditional way, whether it be executive, it be middle A leaders, whatever it be, you're actually asking them to change their way of working. And they only have one lever to sort of pull on if they're not embracing that as a totality or understand how to embrace that, and that's control. Because traditionally command and control, they've lost control. So the command, and you hear a lot of that is, I need the teams to do, I want them to do, I need this. And that flows into your governing mechanisms as well.
Well, is it control though? So
yeah, exactly.
Is it control or is it the illusion of control, right?
Exactly.
Because I mean, I have been a leader of many
Yeah.
digital
Mhm.
teams. I would call them high performing teams. I worked in some of the best organizations in Australia in terms of these digital teams. And I can tell you, once you get to like 6 teams, you don't know what they're doing. And that's in a flat organization where, you know, my leadership team were all embedded in the teams.
Yes.
And you can pretend that you know what they're doing. You can get a surface level understanding of what they're doing, but you really don't know what they're doing. So if that's happening one layer above really effective teams that are delivering value, then imagine what's happening 4, 5, 6 layers. Like you, then what you realize you have built is this ladder of communication, and all it's doing is it's servicing the need of communication.
Yeah.
So it's just an information flow backwards and forwards, not adding value to the team, not adding value to the product, therefore not adding value to the organization. It's just this little self-sustaining, like cottage industry of slide decks going up and down a chain. And it can be very negative to it can be, you know, career limiting to say, hey, the emperor's got no clothes on here, or career limiting to say, I'm not going to engage in your slide decks. I'm going to have a conversation about what you need and how you might come and observe the team like me and find out what's going on, or how you might decide to trust the team
Yeah. Yeah.
and, you know, and engage in an appropriate way. Like we always, as leaders, we transplant the things that have worked for us in the past. And unfortunately, in a lot of senior leadership in this country, those patterns have been established, you know, through not working in really good agile and lean ways.
Yeah.
So they're just transplanting things that made sense to them before, and they don't know the impact that they're causing. Like, none of this is done with maliciousness. No one knows the impacts they're causing when they say, can you just go off and just get me a view of all the roadmaps and what all the teams are delivering? Suddenly we're in spreadsheet hell. The teams are going, what the hell am I doing filling out spreadsheets? My team needs me to help them be delivering value. And it creates this kind of like negative energy, but also just too much over processing waste that's not actually adding value. So,
I think that's where that reliance on going, so going back, looping back to where we were,
mm,
that's where the reliance on going to a cookie cutter type
mm,
framework method,
mm,
and I'm not bashing any particular one, it doesn't matter what it is, right? That's where they lean on that and go, well, that's going to solve all those problems for me because I don't really know how to solve these problems, right? Rather than actually looking at it
yeah,
in a way that actually will build their organization. Now, Alex, this has also
mm,
allowed us to jump into this question, which
yeah,
I was saving off to the right there because John there is asking us a very poignant question. What's your thought on that?
yeah. Hi, John. Good question. Yes, many leaders are looking for something that gives them a codified approach. And first of all, I'll talk about what I think the negatives are with that and what I think maybe a solution is for that. But the negatives of that is, let's buy a codified approach, let's buy a framework. The framework, smart people have thought about everything. So then you're kind of beholden to implementing everything about the framework. And then if leaders then say, I still don't know what the teams are doing, I feel like they're spending too much money and nothing good's coming out of it, then framework rules would say, well, you just haven't implemented the framework as disciplined as we should implement the framework. So let's put in more discipline, let's do more of this model, and then the answers will come true. Well, you're putting a lot on a framework to be able to answer that. And frameworks, the other limitation of frameworks is, you know, the way you deliver value in your business is your golden ticket. That's your golden goose. And if you try and standardize that into a framework, you might have lost your whole competitive
Yeah,
advantage. Like one of our clients works in a trading industry. They have their team working at the end of their desk. So you have traders working and you have the delivery team working at the end of the desk. And the responsiveness of that team is where the gold is. If we told them to be in sprint planning, scrum meetings, work on a 2 week cadence, it would slow them down so much that they would lose all responsiveness and they would lose their competitive edge. And that's really dangerous. Why, that's a simple scrum framework. You can dangerously put these frameworks in place believing that is the answer, and suddenly you're less competitive. So I think a codified approach there's nothing wrong with saying that, but I think every organization needs to codify its own approach, right? And what we see in successful transformations is organizations that feel empowered enough to codify what they're doing that's working, and build on that and learn on that. So it's got to be co-designed with the people in the system of work. It cannot be transplanted from outside, which is why you don't want an army of coaches and consultants in to help you. You want like a small amount and a good amount of buy-in from your own people. So I think you need to co-design it with your own teams, and where we see success, that's where organizations have done that. Try and resist those external framework pushes coming in. And then you also need to have it on its own improvement cycle.
Yes.
So your codified approach is going to morph and change as the world and the environment around you changes. You come up with different challenges. You need to be an ever adapting thing, right? So, you know, even if you used a framework and you decided to put in Scrum, please try and evolve the good parts of it, and lose the waste of it. So I think it's just experience that's taught me that, right? And it's probably the same for you, Tony.
Yeah.
Um, and it's a harder sell to go into organizations and say, well, there will be a toolkit, there will be a range of things that we can do. And what's going to annoy you is I'm going to keep asking you, what's the problem you're trying to solve here? I'm not going to say, here's the manual, follow the
What's
manual.
that outcome that you're driving to, right?
Yeah, and that's a harder sell. That's why, those large companies come in, they've got their 350-page slide decks. They say, here is the blueprint. That blueprint has done the rounds over many organizations in our capital cities, I can tell you. But I think it's a really dangerous thing to implement that.
I have two things to say on that. The first thing is, why would you actually take something that's come from somewhere else and put it into your organization? Because I'll tell you now, any leader who's watching this, all you're doing is taking the problems that exist in that organization and putting them into your organization and adding to the problems that you actually have existing. So you're gonna actually, to the power of 10, create a problem that's even harder to deal with. But then I like to flip it the other way too, Alex. So
Mm,
I like to flip it and go, for leaders, they also have seen some pretty bad, shall we say, agile implementations. And so, these things where, oh, we're agile and we don't have to do reporting, or we're agile and we don't do X,
mm,
that's created a problem as well, because, their leadership, their job is to be able to manage budgets. Their job is to be able to deal with,
mm.
risk and
Is
expense.
it, or are they leaders, and is their job to be able to look ahead at the environment around the organization, spot where they need to change strategy and make decisions,
So that's
aligning us all to a new strategy?
That's the problem. So they've been mired in that because
Yeah,
we haven't done the right things in the way that we've set those up, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think Steph Bysouth's got a great comment there.
What are you doing? Oh, Steph, nice to see you. The
Yeah,
loss of certainty increases perceived risk, and the role of execs is to balance risk over reward to outgrow competitors. Yes, it does. Um, but I think that if I look at the large organizations, they are very risk adverse, which is absolutely fine. They do have to balance the interests of their shareholders, their employees, and their customers. But I would say that it is riskier to be using the approaches of traditional organizations, and like, I think it's half of organizations that exist now will not exist in 10 years, some frightening statistic like that. So, through your risk aversion and your risk at not trying to move to and not trying to transform your ways of working to something more contemporary, you might be just turning your organization into a dinosaur. And a lot of the things that organizations can consider risky would be antithetical to what we believe. So there was an article in our newsletter I think it was last month or the month before, which was about the risk that's around using a cab to deploy production software.
yes.
So an organization studied like 1 million code changes in production and found out that it was highly risky to batch up large changes to go into production and release them, as opposed to small, frequent, high quality releases that are consistent. And that would sound like logic to us, But to a large organization, they think, oh, scary, change is happening, cover it all with risk. It would be too much to run a cab every 5 minutes. So we'll do it once a fortnight, or we'll do it once a month. And then you bring us all your kind of batched up changes, and we'll change them because the risk is too big. So, that's what the DevOps movement bought us, or should have bought us, was that thinking, which is way too risky to deploy software like this. We need to try and do it frequently. Like one of the case studies of my co-founder Tony was a really excellent case study. He was on an agile team inside a big organization, and they said, we're going to deploy after this 7-month project, we're going to deploy into production. Him and his team said, never again are we going to deploy once after 7 months.
We've all been there.
Yeah, so they set themselves a challenge and said, right, 7 months, too long. Let's try deploying once every 7 weeks. What would we have to change in all of our thinking, our mindset, our processes, our automation, how we, deploy code in order to release every 7 weeks? And they jumped those hurdles and got down to a 7-weekly release. And they said, great, what would it take for us to get to a 7-day release? Looked at their processes, their decision making, how they're organized as a team, what could they change to get to a 7-day challenge? And then eventually, what if we had to release every day? Could we even do that? So by changing that conversation around and saying, how do we de-risk this anti-pattern of large batch delivery? They, as human beings, very good at solving problems, went through and attacked all those problems one by one. So once again, that didn't happen because a bunch of leaders said, this team needs to change how they deliver it. The team itself said, never again are we going to subject ourselves to this pain, and worked it out themselves. So there's an example of incredible value that's been delivered, didn't need leaders to help them do it, did it themselves as a team, and also, broke that paradigm of what was considered to be risky. And this is the whole kind of, there's a lot of fakeness in large corporate working. The things that we maintain are really important, are really just a veneer of value add. And so we say things like, there must be governance, there must be risk aversion, but if you dig into it, it's as risky as hell.
Yeah. So the point being, I probably didn't vocalize as well as I should before, but when I said leaders were, their job is to do risk, their job is to do, that's the perceived.
Yes.
So when we don't take them along the agile journey, they get further into that, and they get stuck in execution.
Yeah.
Rather than where they should be, which is, you go to Jack Welch's old famous saying, but I love it, is that, what's a leader's job? Well, that's to enable your people to get the hell out of the way so they can get their work done, right?
Exactly.
And if you can do that as a leader and still then, as you said, get that competitive focus of where are we going, how are we going to move forward, then that's a change. But that doesn't happen. And it's interesting because you and I were talking about it previously. We had agility introduced with the scrums and the Kanbans and XPs and all those sorts of things that we learned in the early days. And then that transformed across into what theoretically is called business agility, and then, add into that scaling. However, while I love business agility as a premise, and shout out to Evan, the problem being is that it's not actually being implemented as business agility. And you had some thoughts on that when we were talking.
Yeah, shout out to Evan too, love that guy. And Business Agility Institute, I think, is serving a good service because they're doing research, right? So they're not trying to consult and say, hey, you need business agility. They're doing research about what is actually happening. And I love that, because let's not talk in glossy terms. A lot of people would say we do business agility at our organization, but you dig into it and it's not.
Correct.
It's like pockets of agility, maybe, but a bunch of agile squads that are in tech, and the product owners might be somewhere else entirely, and they're not truly cross-functional teams. So that little cell idea of a cross-functional team is truly cross-functional team. That team needs everything it needs to deliver, and to be empowered to try and remove its dependencies from each other. But yeah, so leadership has this competency gap that they haven't been in agile teams themselves. And the point isn't agile, by the way, either. I know this is going to be triggering people that are on the call or listening. Is like, the point is never to be the most agile, or agility isn't the point, delivering value is the point. right? Agility is a set of tools and practices and mindsets and principles and beliefs that really enable us to be a high value delivery organization. So I just want to say that for everyone who's triggered by the A word. And I think that we need to get execs into a learning space. They need to be students of their own organizations. And there's a couple of chapters in there actually that are about working in an agile team and working as an agile team. So there are a few kind of hacks and suggestions about how the execs of the organization, and like this isn't new, by the way. I think Barry O'Reilly said this in Unlearn as well,
Yeah.
which is, there are opportunities for our senior leaders to experience these ways of working. So they they might, observe a team, but what are they really observing? If you think about it, senior leader is told by some well-meaning person, this team is really good. Come to their showcase and see what they've been delivering. So they get to see for an hour every 2 weeks some stuff that the team's delivering. They maybe get to hear the team talking about some of their barriers and blockers, but that's not really experiential. So you need to kind of immerse yourself in the team. And one of the things I've done when I went to the larger organizations is go physically sit with a team
Go to
and just
Gemba.
say again,
Go
Gemba,
to,
yes, go to the source. And I mean, I'm very interested in your organization, Tony, and how the AF community is dealing with what is a now remote workforce of the future. How are we going to sit with the team and really observe them? But I really think that is something so valuable to an exec. They can still, read their emails and go to some of their meetings, but highly valuable to actually immerse yourself with an agile team, a good delivery team, and find out what's actually going on, because I think it needs to be demystified for them.
yeah.
Like it doesn't take long before you get away from a team if you're in a leadership level and you've lost all touch of how they do their work, what tools do they use, how are they phrasing their stories. Like, it's not hard to understand, but you can easily get distance from it. So I think immersion with the team is important. There are opportunities like hack events. Who doesn't love a hack event? But what do leaders experience of hack events? Usually they're on a judging panel. They show up at the end and hand out the prizes. But why can't leaders be hacking?
Get them in.
Yeah. I mean, it's incredibly fulfilling to create something of value. As someone who's spent a lot of time writing this book, once you've created anything, a product of value, you get that good feeling. Yeah, my work turned into something tangible. And I think giving leaders that kind of exposure is really, really powerful. And people will tell me it won't be possible. They're so busy. They're in meetings. But what are they? What when you find out what they're in meetings doing, is they're servicing that information flow that we talked about before, that whole industry that's been built up, that maybe isn't adding value at all and doesn't need to be there. So those are a couple of suggestions. And then work as an agile team. So trying to apply those ways of working to themselves. Like, it's easy to apply agile techniques to non-software domains. Software domain is actually quite difficult to do because it's complex. It's easy to apply agile techniques to marketing teams. I'm sure you've done that. HR teams, operational teams, elements of it. If you're experienced, a skill practitioner, elements of those ways of working you can easily apply. And the same goes for a leadership team. So are they working off a backlog for the work they're doing? Are they actually collaborating? Or are they just coming together for show-off meetings? They will talk about how awesome their area is, and then going away to try and achieve their goals in sort of like functional silos of the organization. So I think there's a lot of opportunity that we haven't even tapped with how to work with leadership teams, get them understanding these ways of working, and truly in an experiential way. Like, how did we all learn agile ways of working? It wasn't just through reading books and saying, well, that sounds good. It was from experiencing them ourselves and having those aha moments ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly right. And look, I think the reality of, why is agile powerful to an organization? Because it allows you to have that adaptive capability, whether that be adaptive leadership or that's adapting to change. And let's face it now, we all know about VUCA, right? We hear that, volatility, uncertainty, ambiguity from outside. So that's what I call extrinsic. But that creates intrinsic change as well, or intrinsic VUCA. And
Yeah.
there's a lovely quote that I like. Change is happening. whether you like it or not now, listen to Heidi Heflin. Your teams are going to change, so be ready to change, but do it in a way that it enables your organisation.
Yeah, and don't we hate it as humans? I mean, we hate it as agile coaches. Like, right, I just got that team working, and now you're going to tell me that there's another challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, he's exactly right. And my favourite quote of the moment is again from Jack Welch. I love him so much, but he did some bad things, but he did lots of good things too. But essentially, it says if the change on the outside of your organisation is bigger than the change on the inside of your organisation, you're losing.
Yeah.
And so
see you later. Yeah.
You have to be able to deal with that. And when you talk about transformation, I think that's part of that kit and caboodle is that we have to be able to adapt to these different changes. And so adaptive leadership, Jim Highsmith talks about that a lot as well. And,
I was going to say, you've given me a perfect segue there, Tony, into...
That's my job.
Well, there were 2 chapters of the book that I rewrote because in the late stages of writing it, I joined a group of like-minded nerds like me. We meet every fortnight and discuss things related to what is called open systems theory. And there will be a link, which is to join the Open Systems Theory group in LinkedIn. So this is a group of practitioners from lots of different places. There's a body of people in North America. There's some people in Europe and a bunch of people in Australia who are kind of reviving this thing called Open Systems Theory. And there's a workshop that Tony and I are doing on the 30th of November, but for last conference, and then last conference on the 1st of December, there's also a session that I'm running called Alex has been using open systems theory techniques, and I'm just going to do a showcase of the techniques that I've been using. So the open systems theory body of knowledge is all around this idea that was landed upon by social scientists like post-war. So it's very old in terms of the body of knowledge. There's a lot of white papers because they're all social scientists. So you ask a question, you get given a white paper in response. So if you want to get involved, get ready to read a lot of papers. But the whole concept around it is that our systems are open. Whether we like to think we're constructing these organizations and we're running everything and how it's all going to go, the reality is our systems or our organizations are open to forces around them, market forces, things that are happening in the world. I mean, COVID is a great illustrator of how everything can be impacted, right? And whether we like it or not, we're going to have to deal with that. So the whole open systems theory body of knowledge has a bunch of kind of workshop techniques as well, and almost like an agenda. And that says that when you're doing your strategy work as a team who's going to run this organization, then we first need to look out into the world and base our strategy on what is the likely future going to be, what is the ideal future going to be, and immersed in that future state, how can we then construct our ideal future? So it's a body of work that's constantly interrogating the outside world and the forces around the organization, and it's even for communities, not just organizations, and really setting strategy in that. So as soon as you do that, you realize, oh, well, nothing is certain and everything needs to be adaptable. And the other reason why OST fits so nicely in the book and so nicely kind of with my way of thinking is that when you look at what the new sort of style of organizations that can cope in an ever-changing world look like, well, guess what? It looks like a bunch of agile teams everywhere, and it looks like the silos breaking down and non-hierarchically dominant organizations. So it's absolutely fascinating to be, I talk about it passionately because for a long time in the agile world, I haven't been lit up as much as when I was in the early days, like in the late 90s, when we discovered these ways of working. We were like, oh my God, this is the answer. Why isn't everyone doing this? And OST feels a little bit like that. It feels like it has answers that don't negate the exec level. There has to be an exec team running this organization. So, how can we give them tools that make sense of this and allow that good cross-functional team gold to exist within the organization as well. So so one of the links will be to go in and join Open Systems Theory group on LinkedIn as well.
And speaking of that, we're right at the end of our time.
We got really deep then, Tony.
We did, and I often say to people on here, we could go again and again, and I will have you back on, Alex, because I think we only touched the tip of the transformational iceberg. How can people engage with you? How can they get in touch with? How can they get their hands on the book?
Yeah, so I've got just a couple of copies that I will sign personally on alexandrastokes.com, or one word. I literally only got a couple of copies. I've been fulfilling them, a one-woman fulfillment machine here. So there's only a few left, so you could grab one of those quickly, and that means you'll get the book for $11 plus postage, so it ends up at about $22. Obviously, it's on Amazon. Just search for Empowered Agile Transformation Beyond the Framework, or search for my name, Alexandra Stokes. And probably the other thing I would say is, if you want to feel engaged, I mean, link in with me for sure, but we've got a newsletter, rebootco.com.au/newsletter, and that's where, you know, you can have a light touch interaction with me and kind of our Reboot Co community. You know, some people don't want to be given another channel. There's so many good channels out there. So yeah, sign up for the newsletter if you want to hear what's coming for us, and then there'll be a whole lot of other set of links that Tony shares about upcoming workshops.
They'll be in the show notes, so to speak. That's fantastic. Fantastic having you on. So don't forget remoteaf.co. Click our community button. You can join the community that's talking about all of these things and more. If you're interested in how remote hybrid works with transformation, then come have a look at the Remote Agility Framework, because that's what we've been thinking about, and that's why we're talking with Alex as well. And
it's fascinating. Yeah,
starting to look at these different things. Alex, been fantastic to have you on at Talking Remote today. Thank
always
you so
good to
much.
talk to you. Lovely.